I've been wanting to revisit this miniature I painted a few months ago. It was the May mini of the month, a Freeguild Steelhelm, and to be honest, I couldn't have been less excited to paint it. But something about the process and how I got to the final results really stuck with me, so I want to share a more detailed video about it. Whether you're painting your own Cities of Sigmar army, or you're looking for some painting inspiration, stay tuned and let's dive in. When first building the knight, I realized it would be a lot easier to paint him if I did his main body and shield separately. A shield will get in the way and make it harder to pick out details with a brush. So taking an old empty paint pot, I then grabbed what I had on hand, which was Crayola Model Magic, pressed it onto the top of the lid, and then pressed the shield onto that. One caveat is that I eventually got a much better product called Blue Tack, which is much more adhesive substance and that would have worked so much better than this material. But sometimes when you have a problem, you have to get creative. I wanted to try something different, so I took a gray primer I don't believe I've ever used. Side note, did you know that gray paints have red streaks when they haven't been mixed in a while? Anyways, after a good shake, I primed the body and shield through my airbrush. And then with a white primer, I zenithalled from above. Although I wasn't really using any translucent paints for this model, I want to see how much of a difference it could make in the end results. Let me know in the comments below if you think it does. Deciding to work on the main body first, I turned to Game Color Gunmetal to start painting my base coat from the inside out. I then turned to Game Silver for the chainmail, sword, and some other metallic accents. Then for the cloak, I went with Game Color Scarlet Red. And for his tunic and pants, Royal Purple. I wanted to start with dark colors so that I could eventually build up to my highlights and create a lot of contrast. For his skin tones, I started with Brown Rose, doing my best to try to avoid his hair. With Earth, I moved on to his boots and his gloves. And then I add some more brown accents with Charred Brown. With Wolf Gray, I embrace the older looking age of the miniature, painting in his hair. Realizing I missed the hilt of his sword, I go back to gunmetal and apply it. I then go back to silver to paint in his belt buckle. With glorious gold, I add some accents to his cloaks to make them a little bit more regal. Now that we've established the colors in the main body, the shield is fairly easy to do, starting with red scarlet for the painted wood, and then gunmetal for the metallics. And I add a little bit of bone white for the little bit of parchment hanging off of it. Now, I'm not too worried about the other side of the shield, even though it's not exposed, because for the most part, it should be hidden from the final reveal of the miniature, so it's okay to ignore it for now. I'm going to be applying an oil wash, but first I need to protect the miniature. Taking technical art coat varnish, I douse the entirety of the miniature and the shield, letting it sit for ample amounts of time so that it can dry properly. And then you're left with a very shiny looking miniature, but don't worry, we're going to dull this down eventually. With AK Interactive Streak and Grime and a trashy, cheap brush, I just give the miniature and shield a complete mud bath, letting it sit for 15 minutes. Using an old t-shirt, I wiped off the excess surface oil paint. While it worked great on the shield, I realized I made a mistake. I either didn't let the base coat dry enough, or didn't give the varnish enough time, and some of the paint from the cloak was rubbed off. I grabbed a Q-tip to try and take off any excess oil from the rest of the miniature, and luckily no other paint came off in this process. Now I was a bit discouraged by this loss of paint, but hoped that it wouldn't be too noticeable because it was partially going to be obscured by the shield. Grabbing my Scarlet Red, I tried to bring back the reds on the cloak. While that dried, I sanded off a little bit of his arm so I'd be able to glue the shield back in place shortly. Grabbing Glorious Gold, I go back to reapplying my regal accents to his cloak. Grabbing my Gamsol Mineral Spirits, I dip my Q-tip in and erase the final remnants of the enamel paint, while leaving it in the crevices of the miniature. Gamsol is great because it only affects the enamel paint and not the acrylic paint I primarily have used to paint the miniature. Going back to my acrylic paints, I begin to add in my highlight layers, starting with wolf gray for the hair, bloody red for the cloak, and I do the same for the shield. Tan for the boots and gloves. And then for the highlights of the face, I go with pale flesh. With dead white, as carefully as I can, I add in his eyeballs. Using polished silver, I add highlights to all of my metallics. While holding my breath with black paint and a thin brush, I add in the pupils. This was nerve-wracking. With a tiny bit of Nuln oil, I darken the gold accents on the cloak to make up for the oil wash fiasco from earlier. With plastic glue, I finally combine the shield with the main body. I paint the entirety of the base in black. While that dries, I grab AK Interactive's Ultra Matte Varnish and apply it to the entirety of the miniature and the shield, just taking away all of that extra shine we had from before. Using polished silver one more time, I make the metallics pop as well as add a little bit of a weathering effect. I add another layer of highlights with bloody red, and a final blast of tan paint. Once the base is dry, I add Army Painter grass tufts, and we get the final reveal. Now there are definitely things I would have done differently, but I'm excited with how the end result came to be. Just remember, if you're not completely happy with how you're painting a miniature, then it's just not done yet. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.